Okay. Other problems. How many people conduct assessments? See, if you know enough about assessments, you can pick a test, can't you? And you know certain tests kids perform better on or worse on, and that's because of the psychometric properties of the test. Reliabilities, validities, things like that. So the problem we were having is that our government legislated that the way you got entitlements was through this testing process. So what we did was we tested your achievement. How good are you at reading? And then we tested your cognitive ability. How smart are you? And then you had to have a difference, a significant discrepancy between those two, and then you got some services. If you didn't have that discrepancy, you didn't get services. And that discrepancy is huge. It's a standard deviation and a half. In most cases, that can represent 22-point difference between your cognitive abilities and your actual achievement on a test. Think about how much reading have we poured into a kid's head when they're in the first grade? Not a huge amount. So it's going to be hard to get that big gap because you don't have enough in there. So this is why it wasn't until that the youngsters are in the 3rd and 4th grade that the gap got big enough. And then the research tells us, well, we're not going to close that gap because we waited too long. Okay. Another problem is this whole cognitive measures thing. They can be important in helping figuring out certain things, but the reality is they only count for 50% of academic. But it's a huge part of our formula of seeing if you get help. So it contributes to the difficulty with that. And this was incredibly informative. The homogeneity of IQ discrepant and IQ consistent readers. And this will have some relevance for you folks. So what it gets at is that if in order to get support, you'd have to have, say, an IQ of 100 and a reading score of 78. If you had that, that discrepancy would be 22 points and you would be eligible for services. But suppose you didn't have an IQ of 100. Suppose you had an IQ of 90 and you had that 78. Then you wouldn't get services. What if you had an IQ of 80 or 85 and your math was and your reading was at 85? 85 is still a standard deviation below the mean. That's huge. That represents a reading problem, but you weren't eligible for services. But what 20 years of research showed us was that when you look at those two kids, they both demonstrate the same kind of reading problems, even though one has a little higher IQ, and they both respond to the same kinds of interventions, even though one has a little IQ. So this crew here was being discriminated against because of our formula. So the take-home message for you folks is that I'm sure you have folks, even though you don't label them this way, have varying levels of cognitive performance. What the research is telling us is regardless of that cognitive performance, with the exception of the significantly lower end, that these kids present with the same kind of reading problems and respond to the same kind of strategies. Who do you think in New York City gets referred for special education? Yeah. Young, male, African Americans. Who, as insidious, who doesn't get referred?
White.
Young white gals. So both ends of the spectrum, because of their behavioral presentation, results in some kids getting referred inappropriately and other folks not getting referred when they need support. And we won't even go here. The inconsistency of these crazy formulas that the federal government developed to think that they were going to be implemented consistently, they're all over the board.